I remember I just became like, in all my North American training experiences, I felt like I was really preoccupied with the trainer, with my trainer, with how they felt, their mood, their tone. If I was appeasing them, if I could say something to get on their good side in that moment, could I set the tone right in the lesson so that I was like, I don't know, more likely to have a good time. This is all like sort of subconscious things I think you do. And then when I went to Europe and I was riding in Belgium, it was like, it was mostly men, and mostly men who didn't speak English, or men who were just like not particularly talkative while you're riding. And I kept being like, am I doing it right? And it's like, yeah, keep doing it. Yes. Okay. It's good. How does he feel? How's the horse feel? And you're like, yeah, good. A little stiff. It's like, yeah, okay. Well, what are you going to do about it? And you're like, good question. Like it was just it was like just such a big transition. And I remember feeling really good because I actually could I could start to think for myself, and it was super overwhelming because I had like no idea how to do that.
Because there is an enormous amount of dependence that comes from constantly being told and instruction. And when your brain is kind of constantly flooded with processing information that's being input from the human that's on the ground, something has to give. You're not going to be processing information that that the horse is trying to give to you. And then also you're trying to integrate into your body. And then not to mention, one of the things that we talked about in the podcast with Dr. Paul and Justin is there's such an enormous gap between understanding how something should be done and seeing it done, and then experiencing that skill done. And bridging that gap is incredibly difficult. Anyone who's ever had their trainer get on their horse for them and demonstrate something about like how it should be done knows that there's a huge deficit between seeing it and then being able to actually feel how it's supposed to feel. No one can, unless you get on a schoolmaster, which is a gift. Mm-hmm. Highly recommend if you can ever do it. Do it. Unless you can get on a schoolmaster who, again, that's the horse teaching you, which isn't something we normally think of too much. And that horse can show you exactly how something is supposed to feel. It's very difficult to ever land on, okay, this is how it's supposed to feel. You just have a trainer telling you on the ground, that looks how it's supposed to look. But it's difficult as a student to figure out, is this, I know it looks like this leg gild is, my horse is crossing over and it's the right angle and he's through over the back, but is this what it's supposed to feel like every time? That's a very difficult
and how did you achieve that as well? Because I think we achieve, like, I can think of even understanding the different, like, truly ever hearing someone tell me, okay, there's a science behind the aids, particularly your leg. And if you're giving too much, if you're squeezing too much, if you're holding and supporting a horse too much, then they don't know how to hold themselves. Mm-hmm. And I never learned that until I went to Europe. No one had ever broken that down. I'd ridden in Canada, I'd ridden in the States, I'd ridden in New Zealand, and no one had ever been like, oh no, you actually have to create a sort of sustainable. And because I'm quite strong, I used to be able to like squeeze, and there would be horses that really loved that pressure and would like kind of, love that pressure. I don't know, or maybe they were used to that pressure.
Yeah.
But I could like really squeeze a horse and like help them drop down and relax in their back. But I was like exhausted. And I remember when I was riding in the Sunshine Tour, and I'm trying to remember his name. He's like a Danish rider. He's really great. And he was like, you are way too tired after one horse. Mm-hmm. You should not be working that hard.
Yeah.
And I was like, no one's never said that to me before. There were just like so many moments in which I had like aha moments that I was like, how is it that I'm only finding this out now? With the amount of hours I've put in, it means I've been putting in the wrong hours, which is frustrating. Or, you just kind of scratch your head and you're like, okay, how do we, you know, like, how do you improve on this whole experience and navigate through the thing that you cannot recreate? Your trainer on the ground cannot be in your mind, in your emotional, spiritual, physical experience. And yet they're verbally telling you how to do something. And they're assuming that the language they're using or the way that they're teaching is going to help you understand exactly what they're asking you to do and exactly how it's supposed to feel for the horse. And assuming that you're asking it the right way. I probably one of the first like very introspective moments. I was going to start vlogging, and I had got all of this equipment to start vlogging, and I was going to put myself in front of the camera and start talking about my experience and sitting down with riders and like giving everyone kind of what it was like to be me building this blog, building this brand so much on the road, because there was just so many unique experiences. Everyone was used to say like, you gotta like bring people on the road with you, because I would be like sitting in a shuttle going to the show with like, you know, X, Y, and Z rider, and just having like, you know, just shooting the shit and having a good laugh and like building really good relationships with certain people and having you know, good experiences, waking up early and shooting something first thing in the morning, and like being in the gym with X, Y, and Z rider, whatever, you know. And when you're on the traveling circus, you're like all integrated. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to the Kentucky 3-day event, I don't know what it was, but I had my first like, what am I do? Like, how do I feel about everything that's going down? Like, how do I feel about the sport? If I'm going to put myself in, like really on the camera, and for some reason, and I had done it before. I had sat and done interviews, and I had like put myself on camera before. And I don't know what it was about this particular event, but I had like Caleb witnessed it. I had like a full introspective, like, what is horse sport, and why are we doing this, and what are we doing this for, and are we doing right by the horses, and are we in full integrity? And like, I didn't tell anyone. Caleb was the only person that knew about that sort of. It was like an existential crisis. I was like, yeah. It was the first time that I was like, what are we doing? Like, what am I doing? Am I actually like improving things, helping things? Or is this just like, is this just like business as usual? And is that okay? And like, I freaked myself out. I like proper freaked myself out. I remember sitting in a hotel room and I was like, Caleb, I can't do it. And he was like, and then we were at a Starbucks in a Target. And he was like, are you okay? And I was like, I don't know if I'm okay. I have like so many more questions and I have almost no answers. And I'm like, what is this? What is this? Like, what is horse sport? Why do we do this? Why are there stalls? What is this? What is the intention? It was just so many questions flooding. Everything. It was like a tidal wave. And I was like just frozen by all of a sudden this huge moral wave that washed over me. And I didn't have a lot of answers, and I didn't talk about it for a while because I was embarrassed and worried that I wasn't going to like some of the answers that I was going to find. And yeah, it really gave me a lot of pause. And that's why I didn't start a vlog, because I was like, I don't know. I was like, if you're going to put yourself in front of the camera, you better have something important to say. And
you better believe in what you're,
and you better believe
that you're talking
with
about.
every fiber of your being, especially like with the way I am as a human being. I have very incapable of, like, I have no poker face. I cannot fake things well. I have a, you know, like as we said in that story, I have a particular way of being. And so if I'm not in full integrity and I don't fully believe in, because I'm a really passionate person, I don't know how to be, I'm either 100% or nothing. I don't know how to be anything in between. And so that was the first time where I was like, I love this industry. I love horses. I I have loved horse sport, and I watch beautiful things happen. I've also watched horrible things happen. And I'm like, how do I actually feel about that? And maybe it was the first time I actually ever gave myself permission to even ask myself how I felt about everything.
Horses, I think, when we talk about the connection that horses allow for us to have to one another, I look at conversations like inclusivity in our sport. And with inclusivity, we talk about accessibility. What are your feelings around that? Having looked at this having looked at the sport in our industry through this lens for, over a decade now, do you think that accessibility has improved, or has it shifted, or has it changed? And what work do you think is left to be done?
I ask myself this question all the time. Some days I think some days I think accessibility is better than ever because of the digital age, of media, of making information. I think that was one of my biggest pursuits in the start of the blog, was actually like really breaking down those barriers. And I chose to do that through the power of story. And then other days I feel like with the amount of money floating around and how much wealth seems to be existing within the space, it feels like that accessibility is not better than ever. And so I go back and forth a lot. I think having horses is never not going to be expensive. And so I think there's a really realistic conversation to be had about how do we make horses as a lifestyle or as a pursuit in life more accessible. I also think that there are lots of horses out there that need homes, and that it's not like there aren't horses available for people. It just depends on what type of horse you're looking for. And again, I think that goes back to the culture shift of not making the amateur horseman pursuit some type of unworthy pursuit. Because if we do that and everyone wants to be professional, then there are so many horses in the world that don't belong because they don't fit within the mold of the professional goals that you have. But if
no one wants to feel like a leftover. And that's really, when you get down to it, we almost view the amateur and subset and then these horses as well who need homes as kind of like the byproduct of like the part of the industry that's more elite.
Yeah,
those
it's
are
like the bile of what we don't want to look at. And we can just dispose of, and that's the thing is I think like, and that I think is a reflection of the human approach to things. That there is like a waste factor, and that's somehow like acceptable. And I think that's again, and then you kind of circle back to the other aspects of the horse-human connection that we don't spend enough time talking about, which is the spiritual, the emotional, the energetic. Can those also have a place and therefore potentially also give a purpose to all the horses that didn't meet these measurable standards that we set for them? Because at the end of the day, we create the parameters in which they exist in. And so I think that is just such a fundamental responsibility that I honestly think that for us, it is almost incomprehensible. So, because of the morality of it, that we tend to shut off or disassociate from that sheer responsibility. And everyone thinks, okay, well, I'll just, I'll do my best. And they don't they don't have, it's a lot to think about. You know, it's
The
a lot.
responsibility of what specifically?
The responsibility of how horses are existing in this world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everyone kind of passes it off to the next person, and then we get these situations. And I actually think that horse people are the ones that have the hardest time looking at the darker parts of the horse world, because I think it's so close to home, and I'm very guilty of having done that throughout my whole life, just being like, I can't, it's too much. It's too much for my nervous system. I can't look at it. And then you go through enough challenging things in your life, you're met with things that you never thought you'd have to face. And then you realize, oh, actually, maybe I can have the hard conversations. Maybe I can accept that I'm deeply imperfect, and that life is deeply imperfect, and that the horse world is deeply imperfect. And if we can name that, then maybe we can get to work trying to make it better. But we have to actually be willing to say all the things. We have to say all the things. We have to not be afraid. I'm always, and that's again, like, that is again, I think, the responsibility of media, because I've certainly seen a sheer avoidance, especially at the international level within the sports space, a sheer avoidance of really difficult conversations. Because again, we're in the mode of promotion. We're in the mode of promoting this particular corner of the sports space. And being a legitimate international sport is more competitive than ever, because there are newer and sexier sports coming up. And you could argue that there's only so much space at the top, at the Olympic level. So I do think that's again where you come back to the potentially the moral responsibility of media, is to say, okay, there are all these things that no one wants to look at. Let's look at them, but let's find ways to look at them where we can continue to regulate ourselves. We don't completely collapse at the unbearable thought of how many horses are, how don't have homes, how many wild Mustangs sit in pens until the day they die, because the American government doesn't know what to really do with them, and there's no real system in place to manage horses and burros in the United States. And there's a whole horse meat trade that people don't want to talk about, that there are Kentucky Derby winning horses that have ended up on someone's dinner plate. No one wants to talk about that. But we have to, because we will not evolve as a collective if we only want to talk about the good stuff. If we're only willing to look at everything through rose-tinted glasses, then it will be to our demise, in my opinion.